My name's Cory. I'm the youth director here at Liberty United Methodist Church. I'm very excited to be here, excited to get to talk to you all. I'm always excited to get to talk to you all. Hopefully, you're prepared because we are about to embark on a journey. I don't know if you know this, maybe you haven't packed a bag, but we are. We're going to be setting forth, and we're talking about this new series on the Songs of Ascent. The Songs of Ascent is a very specific set of psalms. They're not normal psalms. There's 15 of them, starting at 120, going to 135, and they're specific because they're all about a journey. Usually a couple times a year, the Israelites would sort of take this pilgrimage. They'd sort of travel from wherever they lived in the nation of Israel. They'd travel to Jerusalem, to the temple. They'd take part in these holy religious holidays, these religious festivals, these celebrations to worship God, and to take part in these sort of holy days. This is an important journey. This pilgrimage is an important journey. That means, though, that these songs, if you're not familiar, are songs that they would sing as they travel. So like literally as you're walking along this sort of not very kind landscape, a lot of Israel's not that fun to travel across by foot, if you don't know. And so they were traveling across Israel, and as they did, they would sing these songs. And that means that this is a road trip playlist by any other definition. And I happen to be a road trip playlist connoisseur. I am one of those people that refuses to listen to anything other than music in the car. I know there are people in here, maybe you're a podcast person, maybe you're an audiobook person, maybe you're a talk radio person. I cannot stand any of those. If someone else is driving, it's fine, but if I'm driving, there has to be music playing. In fact, Becca and I traveled back to Florida like we normally do over the holidays, and that's about a 20-hour drive, and I made a playlist, and it was 20 hours long, because if I'm driving, I need there to be music playing the entire time. That's just the rule. When Becca drove, she picked what she wanted, and that was fine, but when I was driving, we went back to the playlist. So as a playlist connoisseur, as someone who revels in the idea of listening to music and using music to sort of aid a journey, I thought this was an incredible series. I was super excited about it. So we're going to just jump straight in. We're going to be reading from Psalm 120. It's the very first of our Songs of Ascent, and we'll read it and we'll sort of see what it has to say. I think it's going to be good. So it says, "In my distress I cry out to the Lord, that he may answer me. Deliver me, O Lord, from lying lips and a deceitful tongue. What shall be given to you, and what more shall be done to you, you deceitful tongue? A warrior's sharp arrows with glowing coals of the broom tree. Woe is me that I am an alien in Meshech, that I must live among the tents of Kedar. Too long have I had my dwelling place among those who hate peace. I am for peace, but they are for war." This is the word of God for the people of God, and together we say, "Thanks be to God." So, this song is arguably the worst possible song for a road trip that I've ever heard in my entire life. This is terrible. I don't know if you have strong opinions about it. Clearly I do. I think that when you're starting off a road trip, when you're starting off a long journey, you typically want something kind of upbeat, kind of positive. Like when I get in the car, the bags are loaded, my wife's already asleep in the passenger seat, and we are starting off early, 5 a.m. in the morning. I do not want to listen to somebody whining at me. Like that's not what I think of when I think of a good song to start off a journey. And so it's especially highlighted when you look at the very next song. The very next song in the list of Songs of Ascent is Psalm 121. Psalm 121 is possibly one of the most common psalms, like it's the most positive, optimistic. Like the very first line of Psalm 121 is, "I lift my eyes up to the hills. From where does my help come? My help comes from the Lord who made the heaven and the earth." You've probably heard that psalm before. You've probably seen it on a Hobby Lobby sign. Maybe it's hanging in your bathroom at home right now, something to look up to at your time of need. But regardless, like these are songs that you want to read about. These are songs that you want to sing. These are songs that make you feel good when you sing them. Nobody has Psalm 120 hanging in their bathroom. If they did, they would look like a psychopath. There's a reason why we typically draw ourselves towards the positive, uplifting psalms. They feel good to sing. And it would make sense if you were taking a long trip, getting ready to go praise God, that you would want something positive. So why does our author give us something so pessimistic, something so drab, something so whiny? Why did Steve give me the worst song to preach on? No. Well, this journey that we're taking is just a little bit more pessimistic than I think we give it credit for. Sorry, I'm booming a lot. I'm going to move that. This journey is not necessarily a journey about vacation or relaxation. This is not a journey about just going to celebrate Jesus. This is a journey about self-reflection. This is a journey about remembering who God is in our lives, what God has called us to be, and what God is doing in the future. And that's a different kind of journey. That's not the kind of journey that I was taking a couple months ago when I drove to Florida. There's some theology backing up this journey. There's some work being put into this journey. And so it kind of makes sense when you think about it, because what God is calling the Israelites to do when this psalm is written, thousands of years ago, is actually not that dissimilar from what God is calling us to today. If we go all the way back to the Exodus, the book of Exodus, and the biblical exodus of the Israelites out of Egypt, this is a story you're probably somewhat familiar with. Moses is called to deliver the Israelites out of Egypt, the Israelites being held captive as slaves by Egypt. And so God does that. God brings Moses to Egypt. There's some crazy stuff that happens. They go out, they cross the Red Sea, they get to the mountain, they go up, and before God gives them the 10 Commandments, which if you watch the movie The 10 Commandments is like the climax of the film, right? Before God gives them the 10 Commandments, God says a couple of things to Israel. And specifically, God says this. God says, my people will not be like the other people on this planet. My people will be different. You are going to a sacred place. You are going to be my sacred people. And what that means is you will be a kingdom of priests and you will be a holy nation so that you can be my representatives to the other people that live on this world. That's interesting. And it's also not so dissimilar to what we are called. We're not necessarily called to create a specific type of Christian nation state. We don't necessarily believe in the same ideas about what it means to be a Christian nation or a religious nation that the Israelites do. But what we are is we are called to be set apart. We are called to be different than the rest of the people on this planet. We are called to be God's representatives to the other people on this planet. And so that comes with some work, that comes with some accreditation, that comes with a little bit of nuance. And so it makes a little bit of sense to me that this song starts with this sort of lyric about liars and deceivers. It sounds really pessimistic, but it's pessimistic in kind of an interesting way. It's not talking about, like, this isn't a Taylor Swift song. It's not talking about, like, our lying and cheating lover. It's not talking about anything like that. Like, this is talking about the rest of the world. Like, this is talking about culture and how culture lies to us about what is significant. That culture gives us incorrect ideas about what God is calling us to do, that we can ignore certain things so that we can be like everybody else. For instance, I don't know if you know this, but I would say that the majority of our culture is made up of liars in some sense. You could say that most politicians on both sides of the aisle are more concerned with vesting their own power, keeping their own selves happy, taking care of themselves first and foremost, and it often feels like we're left by the wayside, right? You could say that our media lies all the time, and I'm not even just talking about news media. We could talk about social media, who, if there's really anything positive that comes from it, there's not much. What we do know, though, is that statistically, social media is good at one thing, and that's teaching our kids that they don't matter, or teaching some of our students that they want to harm themselves. Like, social media has such a negative influence that we think that it's literally shortening our lives. We could also talk about the fact that there is technology that can just fabricate images and videos out of thin air that is literally meant to mislead us. There are so many parts of our culture that have been shifted around so that we can believe things are not as they are. There are so many pieces and people and parts of the world around us that it seems to be hell-bent on making us miserable, making us not trust one another, making us not trust our eyes, making us not trust our God. That's a common thing that's happening all of the time. It's teaching us to be consumers rather than to be a community. That's not true. Those are lies. And it's easy to see how we get so wrapped up in this that we think that we can make scapegoats out of other people. We can blame immigrants and minorities for our problems instead of worrying about how we can care for people. These are lies that our culture teaches us. These are things that the world has taught us that I believe God is telling us is not true. I am 32 years old now. which isn't that old, but if you're a teenager in this church, it is ancient. That's what I've been told more than once. But it also means that I'm a statistical anomaly, being up here especially. If you don't know, in my age bracket, 65% or so of everyone that's about my age will never set foot in a church, at least not more than once a year. If you're in your 20s, that number increases to like 75%. 3/4 of everyone who's in their 20s do not go to church more than one time a year. And I have a lot of friends who are around my age, as most of us do, and I talk to them about their church life. A lot of my friends are previous pastors or people who are currently serving or people who have served in the past in ministry, and they sort of tell me the same things. They tell me that it's actually not that hard to find a church with a nice building or to find a church with expertly trained staff, with good hospitality teams that make them feel welcome. It's not hard to find a church with great worship or great youth directors or great children's directors. Those things are easy to find. Those things are a dime a dozen in this country. The problem is, though, is that the majority of the people I talk to that are my age feel like that when they get home from church, at the end of the day, they have not been to church, they've not been to a community, they've been to some sort of consumer restaurant or theme park. They've taken part in something, they felt good about themselves while they're there, by the time they get back, they kind of just feel empty. They kind of feel like they paid in and they got what they asked for, but they didn't really get anything else. They didn't connect with anybody. They didn't feel like they were a part of anything bigger than themselves. And I think that that's sort of the problem that this verse is highlighting. This verse, if you notice, is talking about people in Israel. Like the person who wrote this passage was not actually an alien in another land. Like they didn't live outside of Israel. They were living inside Israel. They were living with people who knew what God's call was. They were living amongst people who knew God was calling them to be a priestly kingdom and a holy nation. Yet still, our author says, when I speak for peace, all they hear is calls for war. Still, the people who are supposed to know God the best are so alienated that they don't know what God is actually calling them to do. They are living in God's promised land, but they still feel like they might as well be living in Siberia or in like some tribal nation. Like they feel like they are aliens in a foreign land. And the church is kind of the target of this. It kind of makes you feel a little bit uncomfortable because that means that this author is speaking to us. Are we so lost that we sometimes lose track of who we're supposed to be? And I think that the answer is maybe, right? The church as a whole in this country and other places certainly has lost a little bit of its edge at times. We certainly have lost a little bit of our direction at times. It's easy to see how we can get so caught up in this consumer mindset that we want to make more consumers of Christianity rather than more disciples of Christianity. And that's a problem, because that's not what Christ calls us to do. It also means that sometimes we get so wrapped up in how to do church that we forget what it means to be the church. And that's also a problem. This song is not a good song if you just want to come and celebrate Jesus. It's not a good song if you want to feel like you're on a relaxing journey. But we are on a journey, and we are going somewhere. And that's what this song is trying to get at. This song or psalm is asking, do you know where you're going? And do you know what's going to happen when you get there? That's a harder question to answer. Do we know where we're going? And do we know what God is going to do when we get there? This church has actually done a lot of work on that front over the past year or so. We've cast vision. We've raised money off that vision. We've actually raised a good amount of money off the vision. We have been extraordinarily generous, and the church, I believe, is answering that question. Where are we going, and do we trust that God's going to be there when we get there? And our answer is emphatically yes. We believe that what we are doing is we are seeking God's call to be the church that God has called us to be in Liberty, in this community. That's a big part of what we're trying to do. But the problem is that sometimes it's asking us to be a little bit more flexible than we're comfortable with. Sometimes the reality is that God calls us to be a little bit more challenged than we want to be. Jesus specifically calls us in his ministry to pick up our cross, to be challenged, to be made a little bit uncomfortable. I don't know exactly what that's going to look like for this church in the next 5 years, 10 years. But what I do know is that the people here, including all of us in this room, have overwhelmingly answered the call thus far. That yes, we don't know exactly where we're going, but we know that God is going to be there when we find it. And that's powerful. That's essential to be who we are called to be. That is so overwhelmingly important that if we were to lose that, I would argue that we would cease to be a church. And so this is the start of a journey. We're going to be talking about this series for the next couple of weeks. And what I challenge you with is this idea that you can come and participate in church without really being a community, that you could be a part of this community and just take a piece of it and leave. The reality is God is calling us to be together. God is calling us to be bought in on this journey. And I don't know exactly what that's going to look like, but I do know that this church has overwhelmingly come together and formed a mission. We are called to be a people that calls others to the table of God's grace. We're inviting everyone and anyone. We are not exclusive. We are invitational. And so I hope that excites you. I hope that you are empowered by that. I hope that you are invested in what this church is doing. And hopefully, if you're not, you have the chance to ask questions. You should come to Pizza with a Pastor. You should come to Engage. You should ask one of the pastors or staff how you can be involved, what our church is doing. We'd love to tell you about our direction and how we ended up where we ended up and how we're getting these sort of directions going, why we're being kid forward, why we're being a disciple making, why we're doing the things that we're doing so that we can hopefully be a church that not only lives into the future and exists, which is something that all churches are struggling to find answers to. But more than that, how can we be the ambassadors, the mission carriers, the banner carriers for what Christ is doing in the city of Liberty, or for the city of Kansas City in general? So, this song is here to ask us, are you ready to come with us? Are you ready to take part in a journey that is going to challenge us and make things a little bit uncomfortable, but still, at the end of the day, take us to where God is asking us to go, to be a part of something that God is asking us to take part in? That's a different kind of question, and it's not a question that I can answer for you, but it is a question that I can say is worth answering. I personally cannot wait to see where this church is going to be in the next 5 years. I am bought in. I am on board. I am not going anywhere as a staff person, and I hope that all of you guys feel the love and the talent, and the suffering, and the authenticity that this staff is bringing to this message, that this staff is bringing to this journey that we're on together. Hopefully you do. But for now, I'll just invite you to take part, and hopefully I see you with us.